Today, I'm thrilled to kick things off with Hasan Patel, Communications Lead at Balanced Economy Project. We'll be talking about his career, what makes him great at his job, and what's next on his journey. So let's dive in. Hi, Hasan. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Vishni. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
So just to tell you a little bit about Hasan, he is a strategic communications advisor and has a broad and varied background. He's worked as a broadcast journalist for BBC and Al Jazeera and has led campaigns for organisations including Al Jazeera Media Network, the University of Birmingham, United for Global Mental Health, and Birmingham Newman University. He's also advised NGOs, political and civil society groups, and individuals on effective communication strategies. And I'd love to hear more, Hasan, about your career journey. How did you find your way into comms after being a journalist and all those things?
Well, again, thanks, Vishni. I think from a young age, I've always been interested in stories. And I think I should put that attribute to my grandfather. He'd send me to the shops on a Saturday with £1, buy the Times, buy a Daily Mirror, and any money left over, you can have some chocolate. But then what he'd do, he'd make me read the front page of the headlines and then translate it to him in my mother language of Gujarati. So then I had to understand what the stories were. So then I just got an interest in stories and news for that matter. And as you say, I ended up starting at the BBC as a trainee, had the opportunity of working in radio and really crafting story making through classic BBC ways of doing it, which was really good. But then I took the jump to Al Jazeera, went to the desert, as I say, in Doha, and I was there for a few years. But I started off as a digital journalist. So not only was like the passion of storytelling was always there, but I was moving gradually. So I started from radio and a bit of TV, and then I went into digital, web, online. I remember starting Al Jazeera, and we used to use Facebook and Twitter to drive traffic to the website. By the time I left, they were own platforms in their own right, churning out content, telling other stories. Moving on from the digital journalist side, the next step was communications. And the comms office at Al Jazeera was being set up, and they realized that they needed someone who worked in news to try and engage with journalists in news. Journalists are a bit of an odd bunch. They're a bit of a closed circle group of people, and they always look at PR people in a very suspicious way. It's like, what's he trying to sell me? What's he trying to give to me? What's the kind of that ulterior motive? So I think to break that silo, they felt, let's have someone who's understood the concept of working in a newsroom, what crafts the story, what the newsroom is after, and then let's try and use that to enhance, galvanize a press office for Al Jazeera, because ultimately we had two stakeholders. We had the external stakeholders of telling the world who we are, what we are, but we needed all those stories, all those great documentaries, all those top lines coming from the internal stakeholders in the newsroom. And I remember one incident. For the first few days when I moved into the comms office, I was turning up in my suit. And I realized that colleagues suddenly became slightly hesitant to talk to me. And it was like I didn't fit in anymore in the newsroom. So I went back to my jeans and T-shirt. And I became one of the lads again, if you know what I'm trying to say. I became a member of the newsroom. I bridged that gap between a press office and a newsroom. And I think the key thing I realized was trust. We want to enhance and amplify the work you've done, but we're not going to add another line to it. We're not going to take away the authenticity in the story making, but it's just going to mean you will have a few more bigger hits in other news markets around the world. And colleagues started to understand that. But I think trust was the key thing. And the second thing is communications. And that might sound a bit ironic, the fact that we're actually talking about communications, that's our job. But I had to work with journalists within the team to make them understand that, look, you've done a really good story on problems of climate change in South Africa, but there's 413 newspapers in South Africa who could do that story and quote your work. And how do I say this? The third part was, what's in it for me? And journalists have an ego. So ultimately the trust, the communicating that kind of narrative of what we want to achieve. And then the journalist would think, I want to get a few more followers. I want to get a bit more of a better, shall I say, outreach for my stories. And then that subsequently allowed us to work in a good way. So that was in the proactive sense of telling the world who Al Jazeera was in that
Mm.
newsroom perspective. But then I think what I really liked about it was when I was receiving the calls and we had to be reactive, I understood what the journalist's intentions were just by the questions. I think that really helped, and actually helped a lot at the University of Birmingham when I subsequently moved on, because we had a press office and we turned into a bit of a newsroom in the sense of, okay, there's a budget taking place. We have a research centre on housing or a research centre on city investments. Let's monitor the budget. Let's see what the Chancellor's got to say. And if there's anything to do with housing or city investments or the environment, let's push out a short little quote just to the media. And because of the business model and the failings of newsrooms in the sense of things aren't, resources are scarce, newsrooms take this opportunity to with both hands. If someone's giving them a quote for free, some of them will print it. I remember one example was, I think it was 2019, we had all these lines prepared for the budget. And at the same time, the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, announced she was going to step down. And I quickly contacted an academic saying, you're an expert in German politics. Do you fancy saying something to the media? She's like, okay, I'll do what I can. And then she sent me just 2 lines or something. And even though we had this fully fledged campaign on responding to the budget, nothing got picked up in the news about the budget. But our academic who spoke about the Chancellor of Germany stepping down ended up on BBC Radio 4 Tonight programme.
Oh, wow.
So what I'm saying is sometimes you can plan, doesn't work, and sometimes it's that one little moment. So I think that really helped in the sense of I brought the skills of understanding what a newsroom needs, and sometimes pitching. You've got to pitch it in innovative ways. You can't just send a press release out. So it was those little moments which I really enjoyed, and actually got me more into comms because of that.
Yeah.
But subsequently, then I had to develop my career and understand other elements of communications as well.
Yeah, and I guess when you're running a press office, and I've done some work in press offices, like you say, it is about what the journalist needs as opposed to what we want to tell them. So you've got to understand what their motivations are and what they are looking for, as opposed to, we've got this great story and campaign and you need to cover it. Because that's not going to happen. That's not going to entice their readers.
Some of the community group contacted me saying, oh, we're not getting any interest in this story. We've tried to pitch it to local media and they're just not interested. And I go, so what's the story? Oh, we've got a community star program for a wider... I'm like, that's not a story. That's been going on for so many years. What's so unique about the story? I had to give them the home truth, because just because you've got a community iftar and you've got some random bloke turning up as a vicar, that's not going to cut it. However, there was another story of an autistic child who's been taken to a mosque and is giving out cakes, but it's a way of creating awareness on autism. It's a story, and that ended up in the local media. So it's about finding those little angles as well. So that, I think, is a good way of kind of summarizing it as okay, what's the news angle? What is it I can pitch that they can take with both hands, rather than just a bog standard press release, send it out and hope someone takes it. Yeah.
And what first drew you to the not-for-profit sector? Because you've obviously worked for Al Jazeera and worked for media companies, but yeah, what is it that takes you to not-for-profit?
There were a couple of opportunities where I was offered the job to do PR for a hedge fund in Dubai. People did say to me I was a bit mad to say no, mainly because of the financial reasons. But I think it's more to do with a sense of impact and change. So I think my social conscience then kicks in. If I can do something where I'm enjoying it, where it shifts the dial, whether in mental health, academic research, social mobility, and now constraints of within the economic structures we're living in, if it shifts the dial and something good can come out of it, then it's a win-win situation. I think for me, the satisfaction is after work thinking, okay, have I made a difference? Have I made an impact? Have people actually found something useful, rather than just selling some insurance policy or being a bit more dynamic on the comms front in the financial PR sense? I think that really helped me kind of figure, and it wasn't something that I woke up one morning saying that's what I'm going to do. I remember quite clearly after Al Jazeera, I had an opportunity to work for a pretty big TV streaming organization, and I got shortlisted for that. And then I got shortlisted for working for a news agency again to do comms, and then University of Birmingham. And 2 out of the 3 offered me the job, and I took the University of Birmingham one, even though it was slightly paying less. But I moved back to the UK, and I think it was more about the fact that I was going to be selling or communicating, defining what you're going to define it as, a research that would cause impact in the social sciences and the arts and humanities. And some of the research that I actually ended up pushing out were research on victims of gender-based violence, migrant women, and how there was going to be a change in Parliament and some law to create awareness. Someone was doing research on the history of homelessness and how the government needed to repeal a particular act to give homeless people more protection. And I remember something about someone doing research on like anti-gypsy traveller hate, which was at record levels. And these were crafted as stories. The research was research, but then we ended up pitching it to the right media. So I think that I really enjoyed that. And academics are very difficult people to work with. They're far more, so it's like they're far more protected than journalists are when it comes to their work.
Yeah.
So that was a challenge, and I really enjoyed that challenge because some of them saw the benefits of engaging with media for their profile, but also for public engagement, which is a big thing in universities these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the research is making a difference, isn't it? It's actually creating change.
Exactly. The best example I can give was University of Birmingham were doing research on the level of air in the city of Birmingham and how healthy it was or how unhealthy it was. And that was a route into inequality, economic inequality. So then the city council ended up putting the clean air zone on the city, and that's improved air quality for some kids in that area.
Yeah.
So having a little part to play in that.
You can see the impact, isn't it? Absolutely. Yeah, it's really direct.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what one campaign are you especially proud of, and why, that you've been working on?
As I subsequently moved my career, I was working at the University of Birmingham, Russell Group University, and then I left to work for an NGO. But then I came back into the higher education area of communications and ended up becoming Deputy Director of Brand and Communications at Birmingham Newman University, which is just 3 miles down the road from the University of Birmingham. A different world in 100% vocational teaching, only 2,500 students, 68% are mature students, around 35% were people from ethnic backgrounds. I think even about 90% of the 3,500 were all local students. So they weren't coming in from parts of the country. And the courses that they were offering were like midwifery, allied health, nursing, teaching, like frontline courses. But a lot of their students were first-time university students in their family, in their generation, working class, and people who are going onto the course. Like I met 2 men who came from Bangladesh 20 years ago. They became taxi drivers and they had an unfinished business of doing a law degree. They came in as mature students and they did their law degree and they moved on. But they all had very interesting stories. And university recruitment is cutthroat. You're fighting in a small pool, a much smaller pool with various other universities, colleges, and whatnot. So we started using our recruitment strategy to try and show that there were real people, real stories. Bangladeshi girl who was the first time in university in her family, the white working class man who lost all his money, ended up going into crime, changing his life, going into higher education, a young lad with autism who found it very difficult to be kind of part of a community, but somehow he's reveling on campus, doing really well. These are little stories. And so we ended up like using all our promotional material and called Real Life Real Stories, telling the stories of these university graduates, the single mum who's graduated as a student. And a lot of our potential students could relate to that and see themselves as that person. I was there for 2.5 years, but the work that we started as a team, and we were using social media and on the web and generally prospectus and publicity, the university ended up moving up the ranks within the Guardian and the Times and the Good University Guide as one of the top universities for social mobility. Those students who came in, and if I could wish to give one example, I ended up going into a college during A-levels And this one girl did not get her qualification. She wanted to go to do counselling elsewhere. So I showed her the Birmingham Newman University prospectus. So, look, come down to the open day. When I was at the open day, she wasn't there, and I thought, right, but wasn't interested. Fast forward to 6 weeks later, 3 years ago, September, I'm walking down the steps on campus, and someone shouts, "Uncle!" I'm looking around thinking, what's going on? She's talking to me. I think that's the first time someone ever called me on campus, which freaked the hell out of me. But I guess it comes with age.
It's a respect thing.
I hope it was. But she ended up coming to Birmingham Newman University to do a counselling course. And then I kept an eye on her for the year and a half, 2 years I was there subsequently, just because I thought she came in because of the fact that I had asked her to, well, look for the university. When I was about to leave, I saw her and I mentioned to her I'm leaving, and she got really emotional and gave me a big hug. But what am I going to do? I'm going to be on my own. I said, no, you're not. You've done well. You know, you've got to the second year. But it's what she said to me. She goes, you don't understand how my life's changed. My mum came to this country as an 18-year-old. She never had a chance to study. I'm the firstborn child in the family. And I'm going to university, and I've got little cousins who are copying me when I'm doing my work. And it's like, I want to be a nurse. I want to be a counsellor. And this was like a British Bangladeshi girl in the inner city Birmingham. For me, that just summed up the campaign.
Yeah.
With that particular personal story, that social mobility, walk into that campus and you can come out as a qualified teacher and your life changes.
Yeah.
So I'm really proud of that particular kind of, it wasn't an organized campaign per se, but it was more to do with what's our unique selling point.
Yeah.
Our students who've got some very good examples of hardship, of difficulty of life, but they managed to turn it around and they've moved on to become nurses, midwives, or ambulance practitioners or teachers.
Yeah.
And it's really good to see that.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, it's the stories, isn't it? It's the real life story to say, you look like me, or you've got a similar background to me, so maybe I can do it too. And that really does help, doesn't it? It really helps people.
There was one student who, before she started the university, because of her personal circumstances, was homeless. Somehow her life changed. She got into the university, and now, if I'm not mistaken, she's graduating from an MA in medical history at the University of Warwick. But she was a homeless young white working class girl 6-7 years ago.
Needed a chance, isn't it?
Yeah, just a chance.
That's fascinating. And there's a great story. What do you think has been your toughest challenge that you face in communication, and how did you handle that?
There's probably the professional and the personal. So I'll mention both. I think the professional one was at Al Jazeera, when 3 Al Jazeera journalists were arrested by the Egyptian authorities, and we had to sustain a campaign to try and keep that story burning. We're seeing a lot of it in the news these days about freedom of media, but that was a unique thing in 2014. And it's all politically charged. One was an Australian journalist, one was an Egyptian, one was an Egyptian Canadian. But we ended up having an international campaign called Free AJ Staff, and the tagline, journalism is not a crime. And I think for me, what was really good was it was like the first ever international campaign that you had CNN, BBC, Sky, Al Jazeera, France 24, TRT, NBC, CBC, all coming together talking about the importance of press freedom. And I think for me, the defining moment was when in the White House, the then President of the United States, Barack Obama, ended up saying, I hope the Egyptians free the Al Jazeera journalists. Journalism is not a crime. He ended up using the tagline that we came up with for the campaign. But we had this International Day of Journalism, and it started off with an event starting in Brisbane. And it ended up throughout the day with an event finishing in San Francisco. Some of the biggest journalists that we may know of, Jon Snow, Christian Amanpour, they were all part of this campaign. So that was really, it just showed the importance of communications and also storytelling, but how we shouldn't take things for granted. Our voices can be silenced. And as we're moving in this current age, it's more and more obvious. But I think from a personal perspective, I always wanted to develop myself. And I took one particular job where I just think I wasn't ready for. It's always that. And I think I've had this conversation with a lot of comms practitioners about when you start moving away from operation to strategy.
Mm.
And I was doing operations, and suddenly I got this job where it was about strategic thinking. I took it, massive pay jump, sorted my life, gonna be sorted. About a month, 2 months in, I realized I was out of my depth, but I couldn't pass my time back to my boss because who I. So I was trying to navigate myself around, and I just couldn't navigate. And then after about 11 months into it, put my hands up, and then I ended up going to Birmingham Newman University, and in some ways it was a step down.
Yeah.
But that job was a semi-operational strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was a deputy director, I had to go to the operations, but assistant director. And I did that for 2.5 years. And then I ended up doing more and more strategic work for the union, which has now put me in a position with my current job, but also my side kind of ventures that I'm doing in terms of comms advice, of looking at things from a strategic perspective. And I think the key fundamental thing that I've learned there is that the grass is green on the other side. Don't look at the pay packet. Don't look at the job title. Look where you can fit in. And sometimes you have to take a realistic chance. And I did that job for 1 year. I didn't succeed in the way I wanted to succeed, but I learned a lot about myself, and I learned that I have to constantly be on top of my game, but more importantly, learn and learn.
Yeah. And did you, when you got this other job at Newman, did you also then think, okay, here's my opportunity to learn about strategy, and then you felt ready after that to pursue what you wanted to?
So then I ended up looking out to see what was available. And there were two actual organizations that I ended up joining. One that we're part of, the Asian Comms Network.
Yeah.
And according to Advita shown in Fazana, I was their first circle member, so I'm always proud of that.
Oh, great.
But I've learned so much from the three of them. And I've learned so much from others, whether it's your posts or what your podcast or other individuals. And that showed me that there's people like me. Perhaps some of it may have been the imposter syndrome, I don't know, but opportunities came for us to evolve and learn, and that was the first. And then the second thing, which again Shoni, Advita and Fazana are part of, is Socially Mobile, led by the Waddingtons. That opportunity was a really good opportunity for me to be taught by the best PR practitioners in the country. Whether it's AI, Andrew Bruce Smith, whether it's change management with Fazana, whether it's internal comms with Advita. I passed the course, but I learned so much. And I then started annoying certain people in the comms industry. Hey, I'm in London, can we meet up for a coffee? 2 cups of coffee, £8. Best investment, you have a chat. It's little nuggets you can learn from people.
Yeah.
But then also I'm learning from people on the ground, operational. So I'm on top of on top of my game, but understanding the circumstances. Like I have a lot of conversations with comms professionals at my level who don't understand that legacy media is kind of burning away and new media is taking up. And I remember a year ago, oh, it's not going to change, nothing's going to happen. But I was talking to like young comms people, young journalists, and understanding how they also consume news, how they sell news. It's not just learning upwards, but learning sideways and downwards. I just think that really makes a huge difference. So that helps with strategy, but also knowing where we are in the current ecosystem of communications.
Yeah.
You got to go out there and meet them. And I think ACN, Asian Comms Network, was a good opportunity, Socially Mobile. And of course, I'm part of CIPR as well. So the odd course here and there, any chance of any webinar is something, you know, I just recently was on one about how to use LinkedIn for better communications. Pick up one small nugget that can go a million miles.
Yes. I think you're right. There's so many webinars out there now, and they're not, most of them are free, which is great. There's not many that you have to pay for. You might have to pay for, say, like your membership for CIPR or Asian Comms Network, but then you get all that added value. And when we're in-house, and I felt this, we don't always have the budget to do courses and like big courses. So you've got to take the little nuggets when you can. And it's always learning, isn't it? Always learning, I think, is important.
And it's looking for opportunities without being political. I'm being political with a small p here, but I'm fascinated by political campaigns and communications. And I'm fascinated by Zohar Mamdani's campaign. And I read an article about why they used a particular font color and a font size in their campaigning. The geek that I am. But it really it gave a warm image, the particular sign, that the font that they use, and how American, now certain American politicians are using a particular font which is not straight but slightly tilted to the right to make people tilt their head as well to read it, and then they actually read it apparently. So it's like little sciences of that. But I've signed up to a course where someone who was one of his leading members in his communications team is going to do a half-day masterclass on storytelling and campaigning. It's going to cost a bit. At the end of the day, it's about work ethic and because, as you say, in-house is always a problem. But the work had been good on that. But it's about just learning and reading, and you pick up little things, then amplifying that and using it. So I have no problem with learning from someone else and then using it to your best abilities.
And thinking about sort of leadership now and the kind of roles that you've been in, how would you say your leadership style has evolved over your career?
So I think before I started my work, I was a student union vice president and an exec officer of the National Union of Students. So I think there was always that kind of slight element of leadership, but I didn't venture into politics, but ventured in communication. So I've really enjoyed developing myself as someone who does have leadership kind of role aspirations. I used to manage news of like team of 35 when I was head of planning allergies. And trust me, managing journalists is a headache, the egos. But at that time, that was about 10 years ago, looking back with hindsight, I could have done things differently, but I was learning on the job. But then Birmingham Newman, I ended up having a completely different style of leadership with the team that I managed there, which was basically being a collective team, being more relational, sometimes not having that kind of, you need to speak to him to speak to me. It was a kind of a direct line. So I'd have like team meetings on a weekly basis, but every 2 weeks I'd meet individual team members. And sometimes it may just be for a chat, all kind of KPIs. But of course, the managers who I managed, we used to have a bit more of a structured conversation. But I think the fundamental thing that I saw with my leadership style was of being more relational. And that's because the best leaders that taught me were all relational.
What does that mean in practice?
It was a case of they weren't just top down, do this. It was more of a conversational way of working, but more importantly, having clear targets, but with input from both sides. That meant that I ended up from certain leaders that were doing that to me to see, okay, I see where he wants to go with this or what she wants from me. And I think that communication is essential. But more importantly, I think the leaders that I worked on, they used to carry the team with them. Like I had a boss, for example. This is an example of a bad boss. So I thought I'll never do what he did. He'd call me on a Thursday saying, or me and the team, that I need a report on my desk on Sunday morning because the weekdays were Sunday, Thursday. So we spend the weekend working this, churning out this report on our own time, weekend, family time's ruined, only to give it to him on Sunday morning. And then he doesn't get back to you for 2 or 3 days. And then when you ask him, he's like, oh, I've been busy, I didn't have time. And then subsequently you find out that he gets your work, removes your name, gives it to the big boss. Now, that's not leadership. That's dictatorship. That's just mind games with your weekends, whatever. And he was a very unpopular man. And he's left a bad legacy in my mind, but everyone else's minds. And I just wanted to do things as a leader in a sense of, I want to develop leaders myself as well in the future. And the only way to do that is that if I can learn from them, they can learn from me, and just have a more of a relational way of working in the sense of, I'm not just your boss, but I don't want to sound like David Brent, and that's not my intention, but it's a team. And of course, I would hold them to account, and there were clear KPIs that had to be met. I just felt that I wanted my team to enjoy coming to work, not coming into the car park thinking, oh God, we're going to have a problem. So it was always empowering them, working with them, defending them, but also holding them to account the best possible way. I think it's man management, if that's the right terminology to use. That's something that we do need to have more in our industry because of the challenges we're facing. And I always tell this to fellow leaders is that once you were a junior, once you were an officer, once you were a deputy director, let's remember that and let's try and build something not just for the short term, but the long term. Yeah.
What's the best piece of advice you've received as a comms leader?
I think the best piece of advice that someone said this to me, they were my line manager. And she said to me, that anytime you want to have a campaign, think, why do I care?
Mm.
Why would I be interested in this? And why would I care? So what she basically said to me was, look at the end and
Yeah.
work yourself backwards
Mm.
and work on that. And she's a director of communications at a pretty big organization now.
Mm.
And that has always stuck with me. And some of the best ideas, not necessarily were the greatest ideas, because they had a good idea, but there was no end product. What is it you want to do? What is it you want to change? Policy? Do you want to change narratives? Do you want to change someone's spending habits? What is it?
Mm.
Work yourself backwards from that. And that's always subliminally always stuck in my head. And I think the other advice, which was more from a kind of one of those life coaches who I had for a while, and she basically said to me that there's something called imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
which is a common thing of people of certain communities, Asian community, Black community for that matter. And she said to me, try and always seek out people who look like you, who've done well, and see what they've done. And to understand that you're not the only person in this room who's had that problem. There are other people who've had that same problem. There's no harm in finding out how they overcame it. And that advice has always stuck with me, because I did have imposter syndrome. I did always think I wasn't good enough, because I was told I wasn't good enough. I remember at the BBC, someone once said to me, you won't make a good newsreader because of your Asian twang.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, okay, fine. She goes, oh, it's a very cutthroat with the BBC, go up the ladder, etc., etc. 20 years on, she's still doing the same job. And I'm grateful that I took that advice and I then pivoted my strength to what I could do, and I've made impact or change or whatever it may be, but I'm satisfied with that. And I think sometimes even if someone gives you bad advice,
yeah, you can use that to your advantage, can't you?
exactly.
You mentioned earlier a little bit about trends and things that are happening at the moment. How do you think the role of comms is going to change in the next sort of 5 years or so?
There's always the whole issue of AI, and we're seeing it more and more and we're noticing it. So then that means, would that affect our jobs, the creativity or the kind of the human side of it? Yes, it will, but I still believe that there needs to be people who can craft campaigns, vision, and a focus. And I think AI could be used to help and enhance that. And my kind of advice to people in communications is that don't use AI to do your job for you. Use AI to help you to do your job. And I think there's a difference between the two. And we see the whole stuff just being churned out. People have put no thought processes to it. And they just keep fooling themselves. And especially those who may be looking for clients, the person who's they're trying to pitch it to, probably think, well, hang on, I can save £1,000. I can just do it myself. It's about always remember that the human touch is essential, in the same way human stories are essential. So I think that's the first part. The second part is the world is evolving and moving at a very fast pace. I think ethics are coming into the way we're doing stuff. So, and I think people in the communications kind of industry, PR, need to understand that the world is changing, and we may have to make certain decisions based on principles on what is right and what is wrong. And I think crafting that message, crafting that narrative is something that, again, people can give input to. But I think the final thing is, there's a bit of there's the what's the word, like the kind of short-term economy of the mind of like, how do we win people over, what sticks, what doesn't stick. And more and more research shows that people have more trust in brands, and more of the storytelling and the thing on the other side involves them, looks like them, feels like them.
Yeah.
And I think that's something really essential for perhaps people of color who are working in this industry, because the global majority is increasing in number. I need to start looking at the world that we're living in. It's not just the UK or Europe, but beyond that. And I think those opportunities are there, telling their stories and shaping their narratives. The world is changing at a very fast pace, and I hope people stay safe, but more importantly, that change happens for the good rather than the bad. And I feel that's where there's a massive area for improvement and growth for people in PR, because people need those storytellers, people need those kind of campaigns, people need to understand what's right and what is wrong, what's disinformation, misinformation, and more importantly, how do you, everybody can do that, something viral, something quick, but something informative as well at the same time, and that's a very difficult thing to do, and people are doing it, so it shows it can be done.
And then just to finish off, I'd love to hear more about what the one piece of advice would be that you could give to your younger self. So if you went back in time, what would you tell them?
Life is not a race, but a marathon. And the reason why I'm saying that is that my younger self, I was hungry and I wanted to get somewhere. And sometimes you get people who may be your age or slightly younger, and they push up the ladder, and they've had opportunities due to patronage, due to the fact that they know someone, failure was rewarded. And I'd think, oh, hang on, why aren't I doing that? The advice that I give to my younger self is everything happens for a reason. Take your time, but more importantly, focus on your quality, not quantity, because then when your work shows and you meet the right people, you'll get there. And 5 years ago, I don't probably think that I would have been where I am today, working for a think tank, building an infrastructure for communications. When I started in communications, my job was to write press releases. So and just be confident in yourself and empower others. There's a lot I'm giving myself. I think I gave myself too much advice there, but I think in the top line, be patient.
Yeah, I think we'll end there. So that's it for this episode of the Comms Collective. Thank you to Hasan Patel for sharing his insight and experiences. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow the podcast on your favorite app so you never miss an episode. It would mean the world to me if you could rate and review the show. It helps more comms people like yourselves discover these stories. And of course, join the conversation online. Share this episode on social media and tag us using the Comms Collective. Thank you for listening. I'm Vishni Sontu, and I look forward to bringing you more honest, inspiring conversations next time.